Well, one thing I want to think about is the word we. This word that is used in a very uncomplicated way in the media. There's this assumption that when they say we, that everybody understands what they're talking about. You know, if you watch CNN and they're reporting about something, there's an understanding that we are on this side and then we're telling a story about them. And I'm always asking myself, what does this we mean? And so I'll give a personal example. From this trip to Brazil, I've had the opportunity to present my work a few times. And I feel as if I'm connected to my audience because I'm a writer, I'm a photographer, and there's a community that includes writers and readers of whatever age, as long as you're interested in literature. So that's a real kind of we that is there. But this is probably my fifth event in Brazil on this trip. But this is the first time really that I'm doing a presentation where there's substantial numbers of people in the audience who look like me, who have the color of my skin. And that doesn't really have anything to do with literature. But that's a significant idea of we also. No matter what my life circumstance is, when I'm out on the street and they look at me, that's what they see. Just as when you're on the street and they look at you, that's what they see. So that connects us also in a real way. And so I feel as if, as a creative person, the world I live in is always composed of many different kinds of we that I am always negotiating to connect to each other. I don't want to give any of them up. So early on, when they had the freestyle rap battle, I live in Brooklyn, New York. Brooklyn. And one of the backing tracks, one of the melodies, the audio behind the freestyle, they started playing it, and it was the backing track for Respiration by Black Star, Mos Def and Talib Kweli. And it was such a revelation to me. Here I am in Rio de Janeiro. I walk into a room, and randomly they start playing my favorite song. You know, and I don't want this to be like and I'm here to come, you know, talk about literature, about photography, and all this high stuff. But I start hearing that track, and, you know, this question that always comes back, which is, what is home to you? One of the answers to that is, home is people who love the things that you love. If you love very many different kinds of things, it means it's possible for you to find home in many different kinds of places. So before we just continue the conversation, I want to acknowledge the fact that coming on this trip to Brazil, having the opportunity to talk to this audience is a very deep honor for me. And I'm very happy this is part of what I was able to do here. So thank you for that.
For us too.
Rio is complicated. Favela worlds are complicated. Cops are really complicated. And the UPP process, I'll say straight out, is the best thing that ever happened to our favelas, hands down, in the last 112 years. This has been an extraordinary development in a world that has totally ignored 20% of our population for 108 years. So, right off the bat, this is a great thing. The weapons are out of the favelas. Drug dealing is limited. That means you have less balas perdidas. That means you have less threats. Traficantes, of course, are being moved out. The militias are moving in. But the bottom line is, weapons are out. This is an incredible thing. We have 22 UPPs, I think, now in Rio. This is a kind of a a number which sounds like a lot, but really compared to the hundreds and hundreds, the 650 favelas we have, it's just a start. To get kind of more back to your question, the UPPs are an incredibly influential idea that is really taking hold within Carioca society and the state government. There are a lot of flaws in the program too. There are a lot of things that need addressing. There are a lot of things that were planned on happening, but it's just like life, it's just not turning out that way. And it's a long process. So this parallels what residents believe too, that what they're seeing is something that was supposed to be one thing and is kind of turning out to be another. This is not always a negative, it's very positive. The people we meet every day in the favelas that do have UPPs are wildly happy about them, except for some things. We are asked kind of a couple questions whenever we go. First, are you from O Global? That's what everybody asks right off. Then, are you from the government? No. Are you here to tear down my house? That's a shocker when you get that over and over and over again. Because people in the favelas don't know if the UPPs will stay. This is a super huge question. Will they survive the change of governments, which happens every 4 years, and alternately 4 years with mayoralities? What's the future? And so because the future is unknown, there's a certain amount, quite a bit of reticence to just get on the bandwagon. Let's just get in the program. Because getting with the program can have mortal consequences if the program changes. So in a lifetime of being taught never to talk to cops, never break the code of silence, these rules which your parents knew, your grandparents knew, how overnight, because a police installation comes to your block, how are you going to break that habit? How are you going to say, like, okay, I'm going to walk up to this guy, especially when the guy is a military person or a person of the Bope forces, really big, dark sunglasses, highly militarized with weapons, walking around, essentially, in many places, not talking to residents. So this creates this sort of unknown and do I really like this thing happening around here? The old way, I at least knew what was going on.
I actually spent a week in Rio last December at the invitation of the Institute Moreira Salles, and I spent a week looking at favelas all around Rio. I went to Rocinha, I went to Mara, I went to Alemão. I watched Baile Funk in Arara, in the unpacified, which was the most bizarre street party I have ever been to. So it was very interesting for me as a person coming from Bombay. I grew up in Bombay, and my book, Bombaim Chida de Maxima, is about that city. And much of that book is about the favelas in Bombay, except we don't call them favelas, we call them communities. So our word for what people call slums, we call it basti, which means community. And I found it really interesting to compare the communities in Bombay with the ones here in Rio. And I found the same kind of structure, the same kind of buildings, the wires going all over, which I understand are referred to as cat wires over here, the same kind of public life, that everything which in the buildings of the rest of the city is private, goes on behind closed doors. Here is public. People are doing it in the streets. They are playing, they're flying kites, they're eating, they're fighting. It's this amazing public life that is very real and which urban planners around the world do not understand. So when they built replacement housing for people whose favelas are being demolished, They build this kind of housing which seems that they have never actually spoken to the poor whose houses they are demolishing. I find the same thing in Bombay, and I find the same thing in Rio, I find the same thing in Lisbon, in Istanbul. I am writing this essay, which will come out with a book of photographs by Robert Polidori, who's an amazing photographer who spent time in these favelas worldwide, in which I hope to talk about some of the social dynamics here. My good friend Luis Eduardo Suarez was very kind to share his insights about the whole history of the traffickers, of the UPP, of the militias. And one statistic really amazed me. When I spoke to the people at the UPP, they said that 19 of the favelas have been pacified. The target is to pacify 40 by the Olympics. But there are over 600 favelas in Rio. So what will happen to the other 550? People will just forget about them, or think that all the people that they want to get rid of here will just move there somewhere. So I don't know if the changes that will happen in Rio, which I believe are necessary, will only be cosmetic and only for the purposes of these great international events that your city will be host to.
Suqueto teve privilégio, como ele saiu no início da adolescência de Bombaim e foi morar em Nova York com a família. Quando voltou para redescobrir a sua cidade, muitos anos depois, já adulto, ele pôde, ao mesmo tempo, vivenciar a distância do estrangeiro e a familiaridade, a similaridade de quem nasceu ali, tem sua família ali, fala a língua nativa. E essa ambivalência, essa ambiguidade permitiu que ele descrevesse situações extraordinárias do dia a dia, trabalhando pelas vielas da cidade, de tal maneira em que, sem um tipo de conceito sociológico, sem nenhuma ficcionalização ou pretensão romanesca ou pretensão literária, no sentido ficcional, ele pôde nos apresentar esse caleidoscópio, esse universo multidimensional, e sempre a partir de personagens reais e situações dramáticas. E dramáticas no sentido teatral, alegres, tristes e ameaçadoras, quaisquer que fossem. Então, essa duplicidade da inserção de Suqueto em Bombaim permitiu uma descrição tão minuciosa, profunda do nativo, com esse olhar surpreendente e inovador de quem descobre a sua cidade, de quem desconhece, ignora as mediações e é capaz de se surpreender de novo. A surpresa está na origem do pensamento. Essa é uma descoberta, invenção dos nossos avós gregos clássicos, né? O susto, a perplexidade, a surpresa são fontes do conhecimento e é preciso, então, estar preparado para surpreender-se. Ele esteve e nos surpreende, porque cada passagem é extremamente complexa na sua simplicidade. Para pensar, então, nas cidades globais, etc., haveria muita coisa a dizer, mas, de novo, muito difícil atravessar o folclore, atravessar o senso comum, atravessar as máscaras, os adjetivos e tudo que a gente já sabe. Esquecer um pouquinho tudo para poder rever essa temática. Então, eu encontrei num poema que eu adoro, da poeta polonesa recentemente falecida, que ganhou o Prêmio Nobel, Wisława Szymborska, um poema simples, mas extraordinariamente revelador para mim, de alguns elementos fundamentais da vida urbana, aqueles que são talvez os mais radicais, os mais importantes e desafiadores, mas que nos escapam. Eu vou ler o poema, que é bem breve e muito simples. Ele se chama O Terrorista, ele observa. A bomba vai explodir no bar às 13h20. Agora são só 13h16. Alguns ainda terão tempo de entrar, alguns de sair. O terrorista já passou para o outro lado da rua. A distância o livra de todo o mal. E a vista, bom, é como no cinema. Uma mulher de jaqueta amarela, ela entra. Um homem de óculos escuros, ele sai. Uns jovens de jeans, eles conversam. 13 e 17 e 4 segundos. Aquele mais baixo tem sorte, sai de lambreta, e aquele mais alto entra. 13 e 17 e 40 segundos. Uma moça, ela passa de fita verde no cabelo. Só que aquele ônibus a encobre de repente. 13 e 18, a moça sumiu. Se foi tola de entrar ou não, vai se saber quando os carregarem para fora. 13 e 19, parece que ninguém mais entra. Aliás, um gordo careca sai, mas remexe os bolsos como se procurasse algo. E às 13h20, menos 10 segundos, ele volta para buscar a droga das luvas. São 13h20. O tempo, como ele se arrasta. Deve ser agora. Ainda não. É agora. A bomba, ela explode.